October 1942, the treacherous waters of the Western Atlantic. U-515, a menacing shadow and one of the Kriegsmarine's most accomplished gray wolves, sliced through the cold current before surfacing cautiously under the dense cover of the night. On the bridge, Captain Lieutenant Peter Gross, a man whose reputation preceded him and one of Germany's finest submariners, felt the familiar surge of confidence. His crew had just successfully executed a meticulous attack, sending an American tanker and its vital cargo to the ocean floor, adding significantly to a crushing tally that already counted hundreds of thousands of tons. Gross was a product of the German naval establishment. His training had been exhaustive, lasting years, forging him into a highly specialized expert. He possessed an almost instinctive, intimate understanding of the deep ocean's complexities. Gross knew the chaos reigning along the U.S. East Coast. They, the Americans themselves, had dubbed it the hunting season, a period where their anti-submarine defenses were laughably primitive. Early U.S. destroyer efforts were often futile, their outdated sonar sometimes leading them to mistakenly attack their own friendly vessels. Gross and his seasoned crew felt virtually unassailable. Yet on this particular night, the atmosphere was subtly different. The radio operator, huddled below and straining against the static in his headphones, emerged and handed Gross a crisp transcript of an American radio intercept. It was a mundane, unclassified communication, a simple exchange of sector information between two patrol boats. The content held no tactical secrets. What unsettled Gross was not what was said, but the tone, a startlingly casual, almost carefree efficiency. A young, distinctly American voice was reporting operational changes. Gross's brow furrowed. He struggled to comprehend the underlying American ethos. The communication sounded less like a life-or-death mission and more like a simple, routine day on the job. "They are not hunters. They are office workers," he muttered in German to his first officer. But it was precisely this unperturbed routine, this casual ease in conducting a deadly military operation, that served as the first, profound warning. Gross was acutely aware that Germany could never afford such levity. The Kriegsmarine possessed neither the industrial capacity nor the manpower to match the enemy in sheer quantity. Therefore, Germany had strategically placed its entire fate in the hands of quality and elitism. Every U-boat officer was a rare selection, schooled and honed over years. Their sonar operators were genuine specialists, painstakingly drilled to discern the most infinitesimal sounds of the ocean, separating a distant propeller from the delicate friction of plankton, capable of determining a ship's classification, speed, and exact course in utter silence and darkness. Germany's entire submarine campaign was built upon a belief system that individual mastery would inevitably triumph over brute quantity. However, Gross did not yet grasp the magnitude of his error. This American carelessness was not a manifestation of incompetence. It was the direct, inevitable consequence of a fundamentally new, industrial philosophy of training. A paradigm shift that would shortly transform the vast, mysterious ocean from their undisputed hunting ground into a perfectly standardized, systematic execution zone. This devastating operational transformation did not begin on the water. It began on a surprisingly dusty, unremarkable training machine nestled in the humid heat of the distant American state of Florida. March 1943, the U.S. Navy's anti-submarine warfare training school in Key West, Florida. Inside a cramped, dim, and humid Quonset hut sat William Billy Stokes. He was 20 years old and had arrived recently from a dusty Iowa farm. Before the war, his most complicated experience with acoustics was adjusting the ancient family radio. Stokes was just one face among thousands of raw recruits the American Navy was tasked with transforming, with brutal speed, into proficient sonar operators, the men who would find the invisible enemy underwater. The German approach to this problem demanded years of specialized experience. The American approach demanded a system. Stokes was placed in front of the sea noise synthesizer, a massive, complex console that looked less like military equipment and more like a pipe organ designed by Bell Labs engineers. This sophisticated machine could replicate every sound the ocean held: the clicks of whales, the grinding of sand, thermal layer effects, and, crucially, the specific acoustic signatures of German U-boats. Before 1942, training sonar operators had been painstakingly slow and terribly inefficient. Recruits were sent to sea, forced to listen to live sonar pings. The major hurdle: enemy submarines appeared rarely, and the ocean was vast. Operators spent months in passive training, gaining real combat experience even less frequently. The engineers, facing the sheer scale of the war, understood the stark necessity. To produce thousands of competent operators, they required an assembly line of experience. The physical training simulator became the central artifact of this assembly line. It allowed the instructors to artificially create psychological stress and compress experience. In the dark, airless room, guided by an unseen instructor, Stokes could survive a dozen real-world attacks in a single hour. The simulator was meticulously programmed for psychological noise. When the instructor abruptly triggered a propeller rush sound and announced, 5 seconds to close on target, Stokes was forced to make an immediate life-or-death decision. Across the ocean, veteran Kriegsmarine officers, captured and later interrogated, expressed their utter contempt for these training methods. Karl von Schroeder, a high-ranking U-boat veteran, recalled seeing photographs of the American simulators. He was filled with predictable German scorn. "These children," he remembered thinking, "they will never feel the real ocean. You cannot simulate intuition." The German training system was elite and built on a foundation of personal, non-transferable quality. It relied on the individual operator's intuition and unique, hard-won mastery. But fundamentally, it was unscalable. It was physically impossible to manufacture thousands of such operators per year. The American system, in contrast, was industrial and standardized. It was built on a pragmatic principle. If you cannot quickly teach a man to think like a genius, you must teach him to rapidly execute a proven protocol. This was the definitive clash of philosophies: elite, individual mastery against industrial, systematic efficiency. Von Schroeder did not realize that while Germany was capable of producing perhaps 100 highly specialized operators over 3 years, the United States was already turning out 1,000 consistently competent operators every year. By late 1943, the U-boat war had turned irrevocably. The tide shift was not marked by a single spectacular naval engagement, but by the subtle yet devastating mathematics of attrition, driven by better logistics and, most critically, superior standardized training. The newest generation of American escort vessels, primarily the mass-produced destroyer escorts, were being equipped with advanced electronic warfare systems. Among these was the high-frequency direction-finding HFDF equipment, notoriously codenamed Huff Duff, which could pinpoint a U-boat's location the precise instant it briefly surfaced to transmit a radio message. This technology, married to the new breed of consistently competent sonar operators pouring out of facilities like Key West, created a devastating hunter-killer ecosystem the Germans had comprehensively failed to anticipate. The German system, rooted in pre-war naval tradition, demanded that a U-boat captain be an absolute master of every discipline: high-stakes navigation, complex torpedo calculation, crew psychology, and evasive maneuvers. The entire system was inherently fragile. If the irreplaceable captain was lost, the entire boat and its institutional memory was almost certainly lost. The American system, however, was predicated on decentralized competence. The sonar operator was not required to be a nautical genius. He was merely required to be a competent, reliable component of a larger, lethal machine. The technical difference went to the core of their design philosophies. U-boats were engineered for maximum stealth, but American engineers recognized that the human element was the single most vulnerable and non-standardized link in the entire chain. They meticulously designed the training to systematically eliminate common points of human failure. For example, the American sonar training simulator, the noise synthesizer, could flawlessly simulate the effect of a temperature layer, a sharp thermal barrier in the ocean that bends sound waves, causing a submerged submarine to appear further away or even vanish entirely from sonar scope. German operators took literal years on patrol to understand and navigate this complex ocean phenomenon intuitively. American operators learned to recognize and correct for the layer effect in a matter of weeks using rigidly standardized protocols taught directly by the training machine itself. It was the protocol, the book, that defeated the years of pride and experience. In early 1944, aboard the new U-boat U-858, Lieutenant Commander Klaus Rindt personally observed the terrifying shift in American behavior. His men were encountering American escort groups that executed maneuvers with alarming, almost surgical precision. They were no longer committing the panicked, frantic mistakes that characterized the earlier American efforts. The depth charges were now falling in tighter, more calculated patterns. The aggressive pings of the active sonar were more persistent and relentless. Rindt attempted the classic, time-honored evasive maneuver, running silent deep beneath the temperature layer. He found himself hunted, pursued, and harassed for 48 straight hours. This was previously unimaginable. In the initial years of the war, if a U-boat evaded a hunter for more than 4 hours, it was considered entirely safe to escape. Now the American hunters were remorseless. They remained locked onto the contact, patient and terrifyingly systematic. Rindt was forced to conclude that these American sonar operators did not possess the individual, intuitive brilliance of a seasoned German veteran. Instead, they possessed something infinitely more dangerous in the context of industrial warfare: unflappable, consistent, machine-like reliability. Their absolute lack of personal ego or dramatic flair meant they executed the standardized procedure perfectly every single time. The industrial contrast between the two combatants was nowhere more vivid than in their production and training philosophies. While German shipyards labored intensively to produce the newest, highly sophisticated Type 9 and revolutionary Type 21 U-boats, vessels that demanded thousands of intricate man-hours from a shrinking pool of highly specialized master craftsmen, American shipyards and, crucially, their vast training facilities focused relentlessly on sheer volume and uniformity. The United States faced the overwhelming need to staff thousands of new destroyer escorts, patrol bombers, and command centers with skilled sonar operators, radar technicians, and experienced anti-submarine commanders. The German system, prioritizing individual genius and experience gained slowly over time, was inherently unscalable. It produced elite individuals, but far too few. The American system, which shamelessly borrowed engineering principles from automotive mass production, fundamentally inverted this priority. It focused entirely on standardization, relentless repetition, and radical simplicity. The core insight that won the training war was this: a superior, standardized system could reliably make an average operator consistently deadly. A captured German officer, later subjected to an in-depth interrogation, expressed utter astonishment at the American training manuals. They were written, as one U.S. Navy commander explained with a hint of provincial pride, for a 6th grade reading level. They were disarmingly clear, brutally simple, and direct in their instructions. The complexity was relegated to the design of the equipment. The actual operation was deliberately engineered to be simple enough for any recruit to master quickly. This approach stood in stark opposition to the dense, theoretical German manuals, which were often impenetrable and designed solely for career naval officers. The German officer later confessed, "We were training for a duel. They were training for an assembly line." This assembly line was a juggernaut of efficiency. In 1944, the U.S. Navy was launching new destroyer escorts at a rate that terrified German intelligence. The USS England DE-635, a quintessential example of this mass-produced, standardized vessel, vividly demonstrated the devastating effect of the standardized training philosophy. In a single 12-day period in May 1944, the England and its crew, composed mostly of young men recently trained on simulators, sank an unprecedented 6 different Japanese submarines, a phenomenal anti-submarine feat unmatched in naval history. This unparalleled achievement was not the result of a single brilliant commander or a lucky shot. It was the direct product of perfectly executed, standardized procedure. The sonar operators, all having been trained using the exact same manual, applying the exact same learned responses, operated as a single, flawless, and utterly lethal unit. This was the terrifying, undeniable reality. The American industrial machine was not just producing more ships and better equipment. It was producing more skilled personnel and producing them faster than Germany could ever hope to replace its mounting losses. This technological and logistical asymmetry made the traditional bravery and skill of individual U-boat captains, like Rind and Gross, tragically irrelevant. The U-boat war was being decisively lost, not in the chaos of the North Atlantic, but quietly, systematically, in the factories and standardized training facilities miles away from the theater of operations. The realization of this profound training disparity acted as a psychological hammer blow to the German submarine command, shattering their long-held belief in the invincible quality of the German sailor. The American radio traffic, once dismissed as the casual chatter of incompetent boys, was now understood for what it truly was: the seamless, low-ego communication of a perfectly calibrated system. There was no boastful pride, no dramatic hesitation, only the ruthlessly efficient, almost robotic relay of mission-critical data. Captain Gross's initial error in calling them office workers became grimly ironic. They were clerical workers, but they were running a perfectly standardized killing machine. Admiral Karl Dönitz, the architect of the U-boat fleet and commander-in-chief of the German Navy, received intelligence reports that detailed both the unprecedented scale of American production and the new devastating effectiveness of their countermeasures. He saw the cold, grim truth reflected not in battle reports, but in the mathematics of attrition. The statistics painted a picture of terminal decline, a rate of loss that defied all naval convention. The shocking numbers of attrition, 1942, early war. Germany lost approximately one U-boat for every 10 Allied ships it successfully sank. The strategic ratio heavily favored the Predator. 1944, mid-war. The situation flipped entirely. Germany was losing nearly one U-boat for every one Allied ship it sank. The balance had been decisively lost. 1945, end war. The ratio became catastrophic, demonstrating systemic collapse. Germany was losing one U-boat for every meager zero point 0.1 Allied ships it managed to sink. The hunter had become the hopelessly hunted. The sheer volume of new, standardized American destroyer escorts, combined with the unerring competence of the newly effective sonar teams, completely overwhelmed the finite, fragile German system. German U-boat losses soared to entirely unsustainable levels. A horrifying statistic began to circulate through the command. 70% of all German U-boat crewmen perished during the war, a mortality rate that eclipsed virtually every other branch of the German military. This devastating loss rate was exacerbated by a critical problem that the American system had brilliantly eliminated: non-standard failure. When a German U-boat was sunk, the loss of that elite, non-reproducible crew represented a catastrophic, irreparable loss of institutional skill and experience. Conversely, when an American escort ship was lost, its loss was immediately absorbed by the industrial assembly line. Its replacement ship and crew were ready and deployed within months, trained to the exact same standardized level as the crew before them. German strategists and engineers had, for too long, believed they were simply losing the production war, the race to produce more hulls and powerful engines. But the training war was a loss of a more fundamental, almost philosophical nature. They had foolishly placed their entire strategy on the unique individual. The Americans had wisely placed their victory on the reproducible, scalable system. And the system, without emotion or ego, had unequivocally won. By the war's conclusion, captured German submariners were often transported deep into the American interior and processed in vast prisoner-of-war camps. Here they experienced the full, bewildering scale of American industrial and logistical power firsthand. This captivity was not just punishment, it was the final, devastating piece of their systemic education. One high-ranking German U-boat officer, a veteran of several successful patrols, was granted limited access to an American naval base's motor pool. He observed endless, perfectly aligned rows of jeeps, trucks, and specialized support vehicles, all effortlessly maintained by young American mechanics. He noted the abundance. Every tool, every spare part, was instantly available. He then asked the American base commander about the background of the sonar operators who had so relentlessly hunted his men. The commander, a man whose easy confidence was born of a guaranteed supply chain, simply replied, "Oh, most of them are just farm boys and factory workers. We just train them up using the book." The German officer, whose own sonar operators were hand-selected graduates of a rigorous multi-year program, was utterly stunned. The book. Not intuition, not inherited genius, but standardized procedure enforced by a manual. He finally grasped the fundamental German tragedy. Their entire system was designed to find irreplaceable geniuses, to train elites, and to treat every piece of scarce equipment as a non-reproducible artifact. This design made their individual achievements spectacular, but their defeat in total war philosophically inevitable. The American system, in contrast, was designed to find competent people, provide them with simple, reliable tools, and train them with standardized, rapid methods so that they could be mass-produced and instantly deployed. The sheer numbers of American destroyer escorts alone told the story. The U.S. Navy commissioned an astonishing 563 of these vessels during the war, each one a formidable anti-submarine platform requiring a fully trained crew. Germany simply could not produce enough ships, or critically, enough elites to counter that overwhelming volume. The vast ocean, once a sanctuary for cunning, had become too small, too loud, and too predictable for the U-boats. The American sonar operators, with their non-flashy, procedure-driven consistency, had eliminated the one crucial element the German U-boat commanders relied upon, the element of surprise and the luxury of time to think. The advanced technology, the Huff Duff, the improved sonar, the acoustic torpedoes, were merely tools. The true secret weapon was the training system that placed those tools into the hands of thousands of ordinary men and taught them to operate with extraordinary, repeatable precision. The U-boat war ended not with a dramatic, glorious bang, but with a whimper of technological exhaustion. The few surviving German officers carried the profound, brutal lesson of their defeat back to a nation utterly shattered by total war. Their detailed post-war reports, now archived as quiet testimonies, became a powerful confirmation of the failure of their industrial philosophy. Their collective conclusion was stark and unanimous. German mastery had been defeated by American methodology. In the post-war era, this painful realization became the single most important foundation for the German economic recovery. German industry and technical education, from the nascent Bundesmarine to the technical universities, did not attempt to restore the old system. They decisively abandoned the pursuit of elitism and artisanal perfection. They focused instead on standardization, systemic reliability, and modular, reproducible training. The German engineers who returned from American captivity implemented the lessons learned from the book and the sixth-grade reading level manual. The result was the German Wirtschaftswunder, economic miracle. Companies like Siemens and Volkswagen integrated the American philosophy of achieving quality through standardization and process control rather than through individual, irreplaceable skill. The modern German focus on rigorous apprenticeship programs and industrial standards was a direct, undeniable echo of the U.S. Navy's wartime training machine. They had learned the essential truth. To achieve mass production and global market dominance, you must systematize genius. The legacy of the U-boat war lives on today as a perfect case study. It demonstrates that the most decisive competitive advantage is often not the individual brilliance of a few, but the scale and overwhelming consistency of the many. In a world where speed and volume determine victory, the strategy that simplifies complexity and standardizes skill will always defeat the strategy that relies on rare, non-reproducible talent. The American farm boys, trained on simulators and armed with standardized manuals, proved conclusively that you don't need a veteran genius to win an industrial war. You simply need a superior, scalable system. The U-boat captains intercepted those American radio messages and heard not the sound of elite, daring hunters, but the routine, relentless chatter of clerical efficiency. They were right. They were fighting clerical workers, but they were clerks operating a perfectly standardized, systematic killing machine. The ocean had ultimately become too loud for the U-boats, not because of the noise of battle, but because of the relentless, systematic noise of American industrial education and standardization.